my name is Thomas Nickel and I'm going to present my code. So first I start with the database. So I'm going to talk about how I created a database. So first I created a new database called my applications database, and within that database I created a table called login table, and this table holds two values. There are two columns. In the first columns there's username, in the second ID associated with these usernames, and this table is actually needed when the user enters the values into these fields here on my login page, and these information of the values are then compared with this table here, and if the information is correct and is contained within this table, the user can then access the content of my website. But in order to connect to this database, we need this statement here, and this function has three parameters. The first parameter specifies the IP address of the server. The second parameter is populated with the username that the database is set up with, and the third parameter is populated with the password that the database is set up with. And this if statement here on line 61 checks if we manage to connect to the database, this database here. And if we manage to connect to the database, this print statement is executed. And if we don't manage to connect to the database, this print statement is executed. And it might be because maybe the IP address of the server is specified wrongly, or maybe the internet connection between the server and the database server is down. And the variables itself were declared here. So the first variable holds the IP address, as I said. This one holds the username, password, and this one specifies the name of the database. So the name of the database is my applications database. So once we manage to connect to this database here, this statement is executed here, and this statement is querying the logging table, which you can see here, and this statement is matching the statement entered by the user here, like this information on the login page, which is this one. So when the user enters values, the values are matched with against this table, and with the help of this statement, this select statement, which states select all from login table where the username and ID. So, and when we get the result back, we can check the number of rows here in this statement. So when the number of rows is larger than 0, it means that the table holds ID and username, and the user is redirected here with the help of the header statement to my home page. So it means that he will be able to access the content of my website once he enters the correct values here into this field. And maybe I can mention this variable here holds the result once that query is executed, and then we have to close, we should close the connection to the database with the help of this statement here. In order to use the username and ID, I declared first two variables. The first one is username, and it holds the username values that the user enters here, and the second one is ID, and it holds the ID value for this field here. And this if statement here checks whether the submit button, or in my case login button has been clicked Once the submit button is clicked, these variables here are read, so the username and ID, and the values stored in this like variable are read, actually the values that the user enters into these fields. If the values that are stored in these variables are correct, it means if the values are in this table here, the user is then redirected to my home page and he can see the content. And if the values that the user enters here are not in this table, he's not allowed to see the content of my website. And the user is redirected back to this page, which is the login page. In order to allow registration of a new user, I created registration code here, this section. And this section allows the new user to register in order to access the content of my website. So, for example, if a new user who haven't been previously here, like, and doesn't have the correct username ID, he has to first register. So, for example, user Bob enters these values here, but he hasn't been here previously. This message will appear: login unsuccessful. So he has to register. Yeah, so I put here name Bob and ID 1234 and click register. This message will appear: a new record created successfully. And when I go to my database here and refresh this page, you can see that a new entry was created in this table Bob with the ID 1234, and now the user Bob can access my website here. So I entered the values here, and now you can see that he was allowed to enter or see the content of the website here. And to be able to do that, actually I had to write this piece of code here in line here, this one, and to use the insert statement here in line 139, which is here. So this statement, I had to create this statement, and this statement says insert into login table here, insert into this table, username and ID. So in order to use this function, this fields here, I need this statement here. So to prevent SQL injection attacks, I created this function here, which validates the user input, the information that the user enters into these fields. So, for example, here in line 7, I created a variable and assigned these values to the variable. So these characters and the if statement, this if statement here checks the content of this variable here. So if user enters invalid character into this field here, a character that is not contained in this variable here, this message will appear here: login unsuccessful. User must accessible username must be lowercase. So I will demonstrate it here. So I say Joe. You can see that Joe starts with uppercase, and I can log in, and this message appears: username must be lowercase letters. And this one helps actually to prevent SQL injection attacks, because the user is only allowed to enter a certain characters The other code that I use to prevent the SQL injection attacks is on line 34. So here, this prevents SQL injection attacks because this statement allows the user to enter only numeric values, integer values into this ID field. So, and another one that I used is the statement in line 69 here. This function prevents as well injection attacks. So this inbuilt function is used to escape all special characters for use in an SQL query. So that's the third function that I use to prevent the SQL injection attacks. Now I'm going to talk about a prepared statement. So a prepared statement is a SQL query template. So this one, it's a query template containing placeholders instead of actual parameter values. So these ones are, the question marks are placeholders. They aren't the actual values. So the prepare statement execution consists of two stages, prepare and execute. So prepare and execute stage. And all the at the prepare stage, SQL statement template is created. That's the SQL template, and sent to the database server here, to this database server here. And during the execute stage here, the parameters values, the actual values, are sent to the server. The server creates a statement from the statement template and these values to execute to execute these values. So the advantages of these methods are minimizing bandwidth usage and providing protection against SQL injection because these parameter values, this one, are not embedded directly into this inside the SQL query string. The parameters are sent to the database server separately. So first is sent this template, and then the actual parameters are here bind with the help of this statement. Now I will describe how I manage the handling of error, like error code throughout my code here. So first I declared a variable called error message here. It's a variable that holds the error message value. And I use this variable throughout my code on different places. For example, here in line 28, I used it here, 28. So here, so when it displays this message here, when it checks these values here, and if the user enters incorrect values, this message will be displayed with which is stored in this variable that I declared here on the top. Another line is line 35. So 35, I located 35, so I use it here. So this one was used, for example, in the case when the user enters into the ID field here, values that aren't integer. So this message is displayed here when the user enters incorrect values here. And another line is line 92. I used it here, for example, as you can see the error message, and it's this one is displayed if there aren't the values that the user enters here, values, and the values aren't contained within this table, so this message will be displayed, login unsuccessful. So that's probably all I wanted to talk. So as I said, this once the button here is clicked, the whole section is checked here. Okay, thank you.